Good day, welcome to the weekly ADM YouTube video. My name is Freddie Humfrey, Head of Grain Trading and Logistics here at ADM Agriculture in the UK. Well, I think the summary of the market for probably the last month when it comes to grains and specifically wheat within that is choppy. We've just started moving into Northern Hemisphere harvest, particularly in Europe and into the Black Sea and the former Soviet Union, where a combination of winters and springs having had to deal with significantly different growing windows and planting windows has been exemplified by some seriously variable outcomes at this stage. So I thought it'd be useful just to start off with by looking at some of the weather patterns that we're currently going through and also our forecasting, just to have a quick touch base on what that relates to in terms of some of the main crops. Going to have a quick look at corn in the US to start off with, obviously as the leader for the grains matrix and subsequently the wheat crop, and then have a quick look at Europe and the Russian Black Sea region as well. Followed by that, we're just going to have a very quick glance at Deck 24 Matif wheat and go through some technical analysis, as I'm sure many of you know, something I rather enjoy. So just kicking off with in terms of the US weather. So you can see there, that's on the screen, that's forecast out to the end of this week. You've got the GFS model there, and certainly we're seeing significant heat building up, and heat temperature anomaly building up in the center and the north of the country. And when we're thinking about corn, the western regions of the Corn Belt are just starting to warm up above the historic norm. I think at the moment we can say that with 76% of the crop as of last night's USDA crop progress report, that crop being 76% in flowering or silking stage, this crop is open to challenges from weather. But when we look at the key corn areas, primarily in those Great Lakes states and just on the edge of the eastern edge of that big block of above average temperatures in the US, the majority of the states are actually seeing reasonable temperature. And when we look at the right hand chart, the forecast for precipitation, actually some precipitation. So it's relatively warm but not too hot in most corn states, and we're seeing some decent precipitation. Slightly different question if you're in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but certainly in the key corn states and by extension some of the soybean states as well in the US, looking pretty good. That goes on to support the current USDA forecast at 181 bushels an acre on the yield, and certainly there is scope for that very significant high level on the yield forecast. So generally, providing that block of temperature doesn't move too much further east, being supportive. It is challenging some of the key spring wheat growing areas up in the Dakotas, but I think it's probably fair to say that those regions have had pretty close to ideal growing conditions up until now, and the crop is as a consequence feeling fairly resilient. We might see a small downgrade as we did in last week's crop ratings for this coming week in the spring crop rating session, but certainly the crop is resilient to those higher than normal temperatures. Moving into the EU, and we start to see a similar pattern that we've seen for most of the last 6 to 8 months. It has some precipitation in the forecast, particularly over Germany, Poland, and central northern France and up into the Baltic states. That's not really ideal from a winter harvesting perspective, and there are certainly some concerns around German quality, predominantly focusing around the proteins. That overcast weather that we've had over the last 2-3 months really hasn't helped facilitate a decent protein, decent UV absorption by the crop and by the plants, and subsequently there are a few concerns out in the marketplace. I mean, there have been some discussions about 2020-21 as being a representative example year, and also 2012, and to our mind, I appreciate this is an opinion, but to our mind at this stage it doesn't look that bad. Moving into the eastern bloc, the FSU, and through the Black Sea, we do see significant block of rain in central northern Russia, which is just sitting across a lot of the spring wheat area, which is just starting to build a little concern as that crop starts to think about being harvested. Forecast outside the week forecast that you've got on the screen there is for this rain to continue in those regions. It's probably not ideal just as we walk into harvest, so an area to watch, but I think that probably is being undone by whether it's challenging for winter and early spring crops in the EU, but it's supportive to corn. The US has decent corn weather as well, albeit providing that block of heat that we saw doesn't move too much further east. Just moving into some technicals, and very quickly, we're just going to look at this chart. This is the daily DEC 24 Matif wheat chart, obviously in euros, price along the right-hand axis, date on the bottom axis, and we see this big move from March, early March, all the way through into early June, low of 204, high of 274, something like that. And we've built back into this region around the sort of 220 to 230, where we find a significant shelf level support from previous resistances. And when we look back in April and May, you can see that this area topping out at 227, 228 was absolutely key. It was a big block shelf overhead resistance when we were moving up. Now that the market's moving back down, it's found decent support, albeit in the last week or so we have started to really test that level, and certainly broken the 228 at this moment in time, and homing in on the 220 support, which was also the low from earlier on in the mid-month of July. So some key numbers there to watch. Also, when you're looking at Fibonacci, you can see the blue horizontal lines across that green vertical line. 78.6% is at 219, so maybe a Fibonacci retracement level to consider there. You can see we've got that key support level that we just touched on through the 228s at the top of that previous March-April support overhead resistance, and then again the bottom of that overhead resistance from March, now pulling through into July. So some key levels. I think overall summary would be, yeah, Northern Hemisphere's got some do-gooders and some do-badders. Some crops which are just finding a bit challenging, but that's probably being offset by later crops doing pretty well. As I said, I highlighted those European wheats being challenged by late rains, but that's probably beneficial to corn. And very much the heavy corn use and stocks to usage ratio that we see in the US continues to be really burdensome to particularly feed grades. And when we consider Europe as a major exporter, some of those quality wheats aren't going to make the spec, and they're being downgraded potentially into that feed ration. So a bit of a challenge to watch for. And as we can see just in the bottom right of that chart, stochastics just moving lower as well, supporting that market move at the moment. So summary, some challenges. Generally, S&Ds are looking pretty heavy, not being supported by a huge amount of demand at the moment. And certainly if we break this 220 mark on the DEC Matif, we would be arguing for certainly a target of 210 to 205, something in that region, and some potential downside in the short term. I hope that's been helpful. Any issues, please do reach out to us, and always keen to hear some feedback. Thanks very much for your time.